learn the issues, talk to candidates, change the political discourse, halt the power of large corporations.
Amen.
The so-called, and this is Dwight Eisenhower, not me, military-industrial congressional complex. It requires all three to work, and to work perniciously, insidiously, and viciously against your and my interest, if your interests are in peace and not killing people in the world for state purposes when it's not necessary. And by and large, that is what we have been doing in the world for a long time, and lately for 15 straight years with no end in sight. How can you say we're at war right now? Are you kidding me? We're dropping bombs in Syria. We're killing people with Predator and Reaper drones all over North Africa, Afghanistan, and Syria, and Pakistan. My son is a Reaper drone squadron commander. I know what we're doing, even though he can't talk to me much about it. We are killing people for state purposes. That means we're at war. No matter the euphemism you come up with to explain it, it means we're at war. And by the way, we've been at war since 2001. That's the longest period of war in American history, colonial or national. It has got no end in sight. And one of the reasons it has no end in sight is the influence of this complex that I'm going to kind of focus on tonight. The latest iteration of that influence, just so you're brought up to date, and probably those of you who stay up to date know a little bit about this, if not a lot, is the F-35 Lightning Strike Fighter. The most expensive aircraft in history. Right now it's at $159 million per copy. We plan to buy just short of 2,500 of them. It is a multi-billion dollar program over 10 years, and you don't know the half of it because the Air Force will tell you, if you talk to them in closed door, give them a bottle of Jack Daniels, they will tell you that the trail of maintenance and logistics for this airplane is $1.2, $1.3 trillion over the decade of fielding. It's hard to hold on in peace. It's very difficult to continue to operate at the profit level you need to in peace. So what do? You get war. You have to have war to survive. Here's the London Financial Times saying that Lockheed has made a public statement that, and yeah, there's some politics to it, but yeah, they need the F-35 to survive. That's the first sound of the cannon across the ocean. But when you put all this together, and you put the influence they have on the national security decision-making in there, and you have a recipe for interminable war, and that's exactly what we have today. I think Eisenhower would be very surprised at how fast this has come upon us, and how deliberately it's come upon us, and how, in particular, the apathy of the American people have allowed it to come upon us. At the end of the day, it's our fault. It's our fault for letting it happen. It's our fault for electing people who are sycophants in Washington to this complex. It's our fault for electing people who like big insurance, big real estate, big pharmacy, big food, big oil, better than they like their country. I will tell you right now, it is my prediction, if we go to war in Southwest Asia with Iran, we are done. We're toast. We won't be out of that for 50 years. Every single person we put on the ground in Persia will have a red bullseye on his back for every terrorist group in the world. And it will not be a defense of the United States or oil in the Straits of Hormuz or anything else that the government tells us it is. It will be the end of empire. It will be the total end of empire. And I don't want to see that happen. And I don't want to see the 50 to 100,000 casualties that will result from it on our side alone, and the 2 or 3 million that will result on the enemy's side, because that's what it'll take. Dropping bombs on Iran will not work. Why do you think we think Iran is a threat but not North Korea? Because I'm telling you, as a military man who for 20 years studied these threats, that North Korea is 10 times the threat that Iran is. And he said, well, I can't answer your question. I said, I'll answer your question in 2 words, oil and Israel.
Thank you.
That's the whole difference. That's the whole difference, with a lot of emphasis on Israel. Because we really don't need the oil anymore. We do need, for our allies, some of that oil. So that's still a factor in it. How do you get to this point? How do you get to a point where your national security policy, ultimately your foreign policy, is dictated not by reasonable thinking, not by rational men and women, not by the genuine interest of your country, but by the interest of a select few who have a stranglehold on your government? Well, it takes hard work. It takes a while. When World War II came along, we decided that our strategy, and probably good that we did, was going to be not military competence, which most Americans think it was, not the prowess of a 2-front war fought by a single nation simultaneously and brilliantly won. What our real forte was building the instruments of war. We outproduced anybody in the history of the world. We supplied the Russians, the Free French, the British, and ourselves. The Russians would never have been able to fight 100 Wehrmacht divisions from Stalingrad to Berlin without our production. Congressmen should vote in accordance with their constituencies' wishes, except when it conflicts with the national security interest of the country. That's the problem. So after the war, we didn't do what sane people probably should have done and told these companies to stand down. We were a hugely productive mechanism in this war effort. Instead of standing all that down at the end of the war and saying, go home, go make buses, go make automobiles, go make golf clubs, go make women's purses, whatever. Some of them said to the government, to Harry Truman basically, this is pretty good. We probably ought to stay in business. And they saw it as a very lucrative industry, a very profitable industry. So here we are, not only keeping it in place, but then we say because of that poisonous ideology of communism and that monolithic great power, the Soviet Union, we not only want you in place, we want you building lots of good armaments. Since the end of that conflict, we have turned terrorism into communism, communism into terrorism. We are now around the world supporting countries whom we shouldn't even be touching with a 10-foot pole because they vow to fight terrorists in their midst. We're supporting them with military training, military hardware, money, you name it. Preferential trade treatment, also. What are they doing with that? Mostly repressing and oppressing their own people. Now we're supporting all of those same people in the world in the name of counterterrorism. Since 1945, fewer Americans have died, even counting 9/11, in a terrorist attack than die on the highways every year. Fewer Americans have died from a terrorist act than die in a single year from domestic gun violence. In this country, we have 10 9/11s a year from domestic gun violence. Over 30,000 victims. We have spent $4 trillion and counting on counterterrorism, most of it flowing into this complex I'm talking about. Powell the other day called it the military, industrial, congressional terrorist complex. Than we've poured into any of these other things that are killing more people than terrorism ever did. How do you get there? How do you do that? It's not cost efficient, it's not rational, it's not logical, and yet that's what we're doing. It's because of the people who influence the decision-making process in Washington. You will have more war as long as you tolerate, as long as you have in your midst people for whom war is the ultimate profit. Anyone who believes in capitalism, who believes in the dynamics of the market, whether you've read Adam Smith or Thomas Piketty, you know that when you make something incentivized for profit, then the person pursuing that is going to do it more zealously and in order to create more profit. So if you turn public functions into private enterprise, you have just given the most pernicious incentive possible to that private enterprise if that public function you want carried out in a more or less unbiased, unprejudiced way. And understand that those cruise missiles are anywhere from $1 to $2 million a piece, and then listen to the news and hear that we just fired 227 cruise missiles into Iraq or into Syria or wherever it might be, and you know, wow, Raytheon is ticking. Their share price just probably went from about 26 to about 50, maybe 70. As long as war is profitable and you have this complex, you're going to have more war. But until we get a majority of Americans who are so riled up about this, so concerned about this, we're going to continue it, and we're going to go down. The empire is going to falter and stumble. I ask my students, where is it written in stone that the American empire is forever? And oh, by the way, in history, what empire can you name for me that is still around? We have 900 installations in people's countries around the world. We have soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen in over 80 countries around the world on a 24/7 basis. If that's not empire, I don't know what empire is. We are run by special interests. And those special interests do not have our collective interest in mind. What they have in mind is profit, often obscene profit. That's unconscionable. It's unethical. And it's also a detriment to the sustainability and the continuation of our country. Thank you.